In October 1978, a young man named Tim Allen was arrested at Kalamazoo Airport in Michigan with more than half a kilogram of cocaine in his luggage. The sentence was not just a few months behind bars, it was the possibility of life imprisonment. To reduce the severity of the charges, he was forced to cooperate with investigators, providing information about those involved. In that moment, his life was no longer a dream, but a sheer cliff. Either fall or cling to whatever remained in order to survive. Few could have imagined that the man who once stood on the edge between crime and collapse would later become one of America's most beloved comedic faces. Tim Allen built his career on laughter. Laughter that seemed light and familiar, yet concealed a heavy past filled with mistakes and consequences. His success did not come from a straight path, but from the broken pieces of a life that had once gone astray. Between the glow of stage lights and the memory of a prison cell, between the image of a cheerful man on television and a past he could never erase, Tim Allen exists as a living paradox. He makes audiences laugh, but his own life is a story about how to rise again after hitting rock bottom. Timothy Allen Dick was born on June 13, 1953, in Denver, Colorado. He was the third of 6 children in a middle-class American family whose life followed the familiar rhythms of the post-war years. His father, Gerald Dick, worked as a real estate broker, a job that required energy and the ability to communicate with many people. His mother, Martha Catherine Fox, worked in community services, accustomed to roles centered on caring for and supporting others. The Dick family did not belong to the world of art or the stage. Their life unfolded in ordinary neighborhoods of Denver, where middle-class families built stable lives and raised their children according to well-established routines. Timothy's early years passed within that crowded family environment. A household with many siblings often came with noise and natural competition among its members, but it also created a sense of closeness and familiarity. In Tim Allen's later recollections, those early childhood years were not associated with stage lights or any particular signs of a future career in entertainment. It was simply the childhood of a boy growing up in an ordinary American family. That rhythm of life changed in 1964, when Timothy was just 11 years old. His father died in a car accident caused by a drunk driver. The incident happened quite suddenly and left a significant void in the family. For a child at that early adolescent age, the loss of a father was not only a personal tragedy, but also something that altered the structure of family life. From that point on, the Dick family had to adapt to new circumstances, with the mother becoming the central figure holding the children's lives together and maintaining stability. 2 years after that loss, the family's life entered another period of change. Timothy's mother remarried a former high school classmate of hers. After this marriage, the entire family moved from Colorado to Birmingham, a suburb near Detroit. The relocation was not merely a change of residence, yet it led to a complete restructuring of the family. The new household now included Martha's 6 children and the stepfather's 3 children, forming a large family of 9 children living together. For Timothy, this change meant having to adapt to an entirely new environment. He later said that transferring schools made him feel as though he had gone from a familiar group of friends in his old hometown to the lowest position in the social order of a new school. Friendships had to be rebuilt from the beginning, and the experience of being the new kid in a setting where social groups and hierarchies were already established gave his teenage years a different tone compared to what came before. Timothy attended Seaholm High School in Birmingham. It was during these high school years that he began to engage more with activities related to performance. He participated in theater and music classes, 2 areas that allowed students to stand before an audience and experiment with different roles on stage. Alongside that, he also studied classical piano, an activity that required patience and consistent practice. These experiences did not yet form a clear career direction, but they opened a space where Timothy became familiar with expressing himself in front of others. After graduating from high school, Timothy continued his education at Central Michigan University. However, his academic path did not stop there. In 1974, he transferred to Western Michigan University, where he studied communications, focusing on radio and television production. Choosing this field reflected an increasingly clear interest in media and public expression. During his time at Western Michigan University, he worked at the student radio station WIDR, where students could participate in real broadcasting activities. Working at the station helped him become familiar with the studio environment, microphones, and the rhythm of speaking to an audience over the airwaves. It was an important practical experience for a communication student, and it also helped Timothy develop his communication skills and confidence in using his voice before the public. In 1975, while still a student at Western Michigan University, Timothy Allen Dick stepped onto a stand-up comedy stage for the first time at Mark Ridley's Comedy Castle in Royal Oak, a suburb of Detroit. Inside the small room of that comedy club, he stood before a microphone and told simple stories about familiar situations in everyday life. The audience sat closely around small tables beneath the stage. The light focused on the person speaking. Tim Allen tested his rhythm, pausing when laughter appeared, then continuing the story. After that first performance, he returned to the Comedy Castle stage many times. Tim Allen would step out from behind the curtain, hold the microphone, stand under the stage lights, and talk about things that felt close and recognizable. Family routines, conversations between men, and awkward situations in daily life. The performances usually took place in the evening. The audience came to the club after work, sat around small tables, and looked toward the stage where Tim Allen continued trying out new comedic material. In 1976, he graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in Communications from Western Michigan University. After leaving the classroom, Tim Allen continued moving between comedy stages in the Detroit area. At night, he performed on club stages. During the day, he took on small jobs within the local entertainment industry. But only 2 years after beginning to appear on comedy stages in Detroit, Tim Allen's life suddenly turned in a completely different direction. On October 2nd, 1978, Tim Allen was arrested at Kalamazoo Airport while carrying approximately 650 grams of cocaine in his luggage. At that time, he was in his early 20s and trying to find his place in the comedy scene in Detroit. The arrest immediately placed Allen in a serious situation. With the amount of drugs discovered, he faced the possibility of life imprisonment under federal law. In court, he accepted a legal agreement with prosecutors. Allen agreed to provide information about larger drug dealers within the distribution network. In return, his sentence was reduced to 3 to 7 years in prison. After sentencing, he was transferred to the Federal Correctional Institution Sandstone, on a federal prison in the state of Minnesota. His time in prison lasted from 1979 to 1981. On paper, the sentence could have extended for many years, but Allen ultimately served 2 years and 4 months before being released. Within the confined environment of the prison, where daily life was controlled by schedules and discipline, he began to rethink the direction of his life. The comedic stories he had previously tested on stages in Detroit would occasionally resurface in conversations among inmates. Allen told stories, observed the people around him, and continued to find the rhythm of laughter. This time not under stage lights, but within the harsh spaces of prison life. When 1981 arrived, Tim Allen left federal prison after more than 2 years of incarceration. Stepping outside, he did not immediately return to Detroit. Instead, Allen moved to Los Angeles, the center of the American entertainment industry, where he began his life again with small stand-up performances and an unstable work schedule. In the years after restarting his career, Allen appeared in several local television commercials and participated in comedy programs broadcast on cable. In these programs, he stood alone on stage with a microphone, lights shining from the front, while the audience below reacted directly to each story he told. On stage, the content of his performances revolved around observations of everyday life. Tim Allen spoke about family situations, differences in thinking between men and women, and small troubles in daily routines that audiences could easily recognize from their own lives. He walked back and forth across the stage, paused in the middle of a story, looked down at the audience, and continued when laughter emerged. Performances like these were repeated night after night at comedy clubs around Detroit. With each time he stood on stage, Allen adjusted his timing, added or removed details, and gradually developed a comedic style based on familiar observations of American family life. After leaving the comedy stage in Detroit during his early years of performing, Tim Allen gradually began to appear more frequently within the rapidly growing network of comedy clubs across the United States in the early 1980s. Traveling between different cities became a familiar part of his performing life, standing on stage in front of audiences at comedy clubs in the evening, then continuing on to another location to perform on the following nights. Allen continued to build his material based on observations of everyday life. On stage, he spoke about familiar details of family life, awkward situations in men's daily routines, and common conversations among friends. The audience sat around small tables in the comedy club, looking up at the stage where Allen stood alone with a microphone, moving back and forth between storytelling segments and pausing when laughter appeared. Alongside his live performances, Tim Allen began to receive opportunities to appear on television. In the mid-1980s, he participated in several comedy programs broadcast on cable and in television shows designed for emerging comedians. These programs were often filmed in small studios or comedy club stages, where Allen performed stand-up routines in front of a live audience. By the late 1980s, his television appearances became more frequent. Tim Allen appeared on talk shows and comedy showcases, where comedians performed stand-up routines in front of cameras and studio audiences. On the television stage, he continued to use his familiar style, telling stories about family life, the habits of men in everyday routines, and small, ordinary situations from daily life. During this same period, Allen also appeared in several television commercials and took on small acting roles when opportunities arose. One of his early screen appearances was in the film Tropical Snow, where he played a minor role. These jobs took place alongside his ongoing stand-up performances at comedy clubs. The constant travel between cities, the nights spent on comedy club stages, and his appearances on television gradually made Tim Allen a more recognizable figure within the American stand-up community by the late 1980s. On stage, he held a microphone and told stories about everyday life, family routines, differences between men and women, and the familiar awkward situations in the lives of American fathers. It was precisely those stories that later attracted the attention of television producers who were searching for a new sitcom concept in the early 1990s. The observations about family life that Allen had once told on stage began to be seen as suitable material for a television series centered on the image of the man within the American family. In 1991, Allen was cast in the leading role in the television series Home Improvement. His character, Tim Taylor, was the host of a home improvement show within the world of the series. On screen, Taylor often appeared in a workshop standing among drills, power saws, and mechanical equipment, constantly trying to prove himself as a man who understood machinery and technical work. However, behind that confidence was a father who frequently found himself in trouble within his own home. Failed repair attempts, arguments with his 3 sons, and the patience of his wife created the familiar rhythm of the show. This role was almost a direct extension of the comedic style Allen had developed on the stand-up stage. The situations in Home Improvement drew directly from the themes he had explored in his comedy routines: family life, the differences between men and women, and the humorous situations that arise when a man tries to appear stronger than he actually is. On set, Allen moved between scenes of the fictional show Tool Time and scenes of daily life in the Taylor household, where his character had to face the familiar challenges of American family life. The show quickly attracted television audiences. In its early years on air, Home Improvement became one of the most watched sitcoms on American television. Viewers recognized in Tim Taylor a figure both familiar and humorous, the father in a middle-class family, a man who loved machinery, enjoyed experimenting with bold technical solutions, yet frequently had to face the consequences of those very experiments. The success of the series did not come only from its script or its familiar sitcom structure. It was also closely tied to the way Allen portrayed the character, the recognizable grunt whenever the character became excited about a new tool, the somewhat excessive confidence when repairing equipment, and then the awkwardness when things did not go as planned. And these details made Tim Taylor a character easily recognizable to American television audiences throughout the 1990s. Just a few years after Home Improvement began airing, Tim Allen's career entered a particularly rare moment in the entertainment industry. In 1994, within a very short period of time, 3 different sectors of American show business simultaneously saw his name at the top. The film The Santa Claus, in which Allen played Scott Calvin, an ordinary man who unexpectedly becomes Santa Claus, reached #1 at the U.S. box office. On television, Home Improvement continued to hold its position as the most watched sitcom. At the same time, his humor book, Don't Stand Too Close to a Naked Man, climbed onto the New York Times bestseller list. For an actor to simultaneously top the box office, television ratings, and the bestseller list within the same week is a rare phenomenon in the history of American entertainment. For Tim Allen, this moment marked the point at which he was no longer just a stand-up comedian or a familiar sitcom face, but had become a figure with broader influence in popular culture. The success of Home Improvement continued across multiple seasons. In 1995, Allen received the Golden Globe Award for his role as Tim Taylor. The award reflected recognition from the television industry for a sitcom that had attracted a large audience and maintained its appeal across many seasons. Behind the lights of the sitcom set, Allen's schedule during these years became increasingly demanding. Filming sessions took place in front of a studio audience, and where each scene had to be performed multiple times to achieve the precise comedic timing. In addition to his television schedule, he also participated in promoting film projects, appeared on talk shows, and continued to maintain his presence within a rapidly expanding entertainment industry. As Home Improvement moved toward its final season in the late 1990s, Tim Allen's position in the American television industry had clearly changed compared to the days when he performed on comedy club stages in Detroit. By 1999, in the 8th and final season of the series, his salary reached approximately $1.25 million per episode, a figure that reflected the scale of the show's commercial success. After nearly a decade on the air, Home Improvement concluded its run in 1999. For Tim Allen, these years marked not only the success of a popular sitcom, but also a turning point that carried him from the world of small comedy clubs to a central position in American television during the 1990s. The success of Home Improvement placed Tim Allen at the center of American television throughout the 1990s. But at the very moment when his sitcom career reached its peak, his path began to open in another direction. The stories about family life that had once made audiences laugh on stand-up stages and television screens began to lead him into film. At first, these were simply natural extensions for a popular sitcom star. But one of those projects would become a far greater turning point than initially expected. In 1995, Tim Allen voiced the character Buzz Lightyear in Toy Story, a project produced through the collaboration between Pixar and Walt Disney Pictures. At the time the film was being made, the film industry was standing at the edge of a major experiment. Toy Story was the first feature-length film created entirely using 3D computer animation technology. No one could be certain how audiences would respond to a cinematic world no longer drawn by hand, but constructed from digital models. Inside the recording studio, Allen worked alone in front of a microphone. Unlike live-action films, the actors of Toy Story did not stand together to deliver dialogue. Each recorded their parts separately, which were then assembled during post-production. This meant the entire weight of the character had to rely on the voice alone. Buzz Lightyear was designed as a toy astronaut who believed himself to be a real space hero. The character spoke with certainty, full of belief in his mission. It was, precisely, this near-absolute seriousness that created a distinct form of humor, as Buzz existed in a world that was, in reality, just a child's bedroom. Tim Allen's voice gave the character a very specific tone. Firm and strong, yet still carrying the innocence of someone who truly believed he was carrying out a mission in outer space. When Toy Story was released in 1995, it quickly became a box office phenomenon, earning over $370 million worldwide. The film's success was not only measured by its revenue. Toy Story marked the beginning of the computer animation era in cinema and was later awarded a Special Achievement Oscar in 1996 by the Academy in recognition of Pixar's technical accomplishment. For Tim Allen, Buzz Lightyear became a character that extended far beyond a single film. His voice became inseparable from an animated figure recognized around the world, bringing Allen to a new generation of audiences, family moviegoers who knew him not from a television sitcom, but from a toy astronaut with plastic wings and a promise of journeys to infinity. The success of Toy Story opened another busy phase in Allen's film career. He continued to appear in comedy films aimed at mainstream audiences. In Jungle 2 Jungle, Allen played a New York businessman who discovers he has a son raised in the Amazon rainforest. His character is placed into a series of awkward situations as the modern world of Manhattan collides with the boy's primitive habits. The film drew on a familiar image associated with Allen, a man trying to control situations that are beyond his grasp. By the late 1990s, Allen returned to the project that had changed his career. Toy Story 2 continued the story of Woody and Buzz Lightyear. This time, Buzz was no longer just a supporting character. He became a central part of the mission to rescue Woody. The film earned over $480 million worldwide and received strong critical acclaim, often cited as one of the rare sequels that matched the quality of the original. Also in 1999, Tim Allen appeared in Galaxy Quest, a science fiction comedy with satirical elements. In the film, he played Jason Nesmith, an actor once famous for a science fiction television series who now lives in the shadow of the character he once portrayed. When a group of aliens mistakenly believe that the television show is an actual historical record, Allen's character is unexpectedly drawn into a real space adventure, where he is forced to play the hero he once only portrayed in a script. This role carried a different tone compared to the family comedies associated with Allen during the same period. Jason Nesmith is an actor who was once beloved, but now faces the exhaustion of past fame, with autograph sessions and fan conventions where audiences remember only a single role. The story of Galaxy Quest therefore carries a subtle layer of satire about the television world itself, and the way stars can become permanently tied to the images they once created. Upon release, the film earned approximately $90 million worldwide. This figure did not place Galaxy Quest among the major box office blockbusters of its time, but over time the film developed a different kind of legacy. In the years following its release, Galaxy Quest gradually came to be regarded as a cult classic within the science fiction comedy genre, a work that audiences continued to appreciate for the way it both celebrated and gently satirized the world of television science fiction series. Entering the early 2000s, Tim Allen returned to one of the most familiar film characters of his career. The Santa Claus 2 brought him back as Scott Calvin, the ordinary man who had become Santa Claus since the story began in 1994. This time, Allen's character faced an unexpected condition. If he wanted to continue as Santa, he had to find a wife before Christmas Eve. The story maintained the familiar rhythm of family comedy, with Scott Calvin trying to fulfill his duties at the North Pole while awkwardly navigating his personal life. Upon release, the film earned more than $170 million worldwide, continuing to sustain Tim Allen's image in family-oriented entertainment. The projects that followed continued to revolve around that familiar domestic space. Christmas with the Cranks placed Allen in the role of a man who decides, and together with his wife, to skip Christmas in order to go on vacation, only to realize that his entire neighborhood views this decision as something almost unacceptable. The story is built around small situations in suburban American life, where a personal decision can quickly become a topic for the entire community. Roles like these continued to draw on Allen's familiar image, an ordinary man caught in situations that go beyond his original plans. Amid the film projects of the 2000s, Allen also appeared in a film that carried a tone entirely different from the world of Pixar's toys. On screen this time, he stood alongside John Travolta, Martin Lawrence, and William H. Macy, four middle-aged men wearing leather jackets, riding motorcycles, and leaving behind their familiar lives to embark on a long journey across America. The story of Wild Hogs revolves around a feeling that many middle-aged men come to recognize at a certain point, when a stable life begins to feel more confined than the dreams that once existed. Allen's character is a dentist, caught between work, family, and the sense that the most exciting years of his life have already passed. The motorcycle trip becomes a belated attempt to rediscover a sense of freedom. On screen, Allen was no longer the father from a sitcom or the voice of a toy astronaut. He appeared among long highways, roadside bars, and unexpected encounters with motorcycle gangs. The film carried the rhythm of a comedic road trip, where four middle-aged men tried to relive a sense of adventure they had once believed was left behind. When released in 2007, Wild Hogs earned more than $250 million worldwide, becoming one of the major box office successes during Tim Allen's film career in that period. However, Allen also attempted to step outside that familiar image in several other projects. In 2008, he appeared in Red Belt, directed by David Mamet. This was a film with a more serious tone, centered on the world of martial arts and personal honor. Allen took on a supporting role in this story, appearing in a context very different from the family comedies that had long been associated with his name. By 2010, Allen returned to the character that had become closely tied to his film career. Toy Story 3 was released and quickly became a global phenomenon, earning more than $1 billion worldwide. The film won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature and received strong critical acclaim. In this installment, Buzz Lightyear and the other toys faced a major change. Andy, their owner, I was growing up and preparing to leave childhood behind. The journey of the characters carried a more mature, emotional tone than the previous films. as the story was no longer just about toys, but also about growing up and letting go of the things once tied to childhood. That same year, Tim Allen took on a different role in the film industry by directing Crazy on the Outside, stepping behind the camera for the first time instead of appearing in front of it. Alongside his film work, he also appeared on television as the host of the TV Land Awards. During these years, Allen moved continuously between multiple spaces within the entertainment industry: film sets, Pixar's voice recording studios, and television programs. Wherever he was, his voice remained tied to a character that had become an icon of modern animation, Buzz Lightyear, in the Toy Story series. After many years focusing on film and voice acting, Allen returned to television. In 2011, he appeared in Last Man Standing, playing Mike Baxter, a father working at an outdoor sporting goods store and the only man in a family with 3 daughters. The household debates, everyday situations, and familiar comedic rhythm brought Allen back to the sitcom space that had once defined his name. On screen, Allen gave Mike Baxter an image that was both firm and humorous, a man who believed in traditional values but constantly had to adjust himself while living among a new generation with different perspectives. The character moved through each episode with family arguments, awkward everyday situations, and deeply relatable moments when a father realizes that the world around him is changing faster than he expected. Last Man Standing quickly attracted a stable audience over multiple seasons. However, in 2017, the show was unexpectedly canceled by ABC after 6 seasons. This decision sparked strong reactions from the series' viewers. Campaigns calling for the show's continuation appeared across social media and within the television audience community. Just 1 year later, Mike Baxter's story unexpectedly continued when Fox Broadcasting Company decided to revive the series. The cast returned to the set, the familiar rooms of the Baxter home were rebuilt, and the show resumed airing with new seasons. For nearly a decade, Tim Allen once again stood in the middle of a sitcom set, moving between the living room, kitchen, and sporting goods store of Mike Baxter's world, delivering lines in front of a live studio audience and maintaining the comedic rhythm that had been associated with him since Home Improvement. The final years of Last Man Standing were also a time when Allen moved fluidly between 2 spaces of his career: the television set and the voice recording studio. Some days, he stepped through the door of the Baxter home to continue Mike Baxter's humorous debates. Other days, as he stood before a microphone at Pixar's studio, recording the voice of a character that had been tied to him for many years. When Toy Story 4 was released, Buzz Lightyear once again appeared on the big screen alongside the familiar characters of the series. The film quickly surpassed $1 billion in global revenue, showing that the world of Toy Story continued to attract audiences after many decades. Allen's voice, familiar to multiple generations of viewers, continued to resonate from the recording studio, inseparably linked to the toy astronaut who had become an icon of modern animation. By 2021, Last Man Standing concluded after 9 seasons. The studio lights gradually dimmed, the familiar sets of the Baxter home were dismantled, and Allen stepped away from the sitcom that had been part of his life for nearly a decade. Once again, he walked out of the television set, the place where his career had once surged, to continue with other projects in the entertainment industry. Not long after, he returned once more to a character that family audiences had known for many years. In the series The Santa Clauses, Allen once again put on the red suit of Santa Claus. This time, the story takes place many years after Scott Calvin has grown accustomed to his role at the North Pole, as the character begins to think about finding a successor for a position he has held for a long time. But alongside those stage lights, Tim Allen's private life was also gradually moving through its own fractures. It was during the still struggling years of his early career that his personal life began to form its first attachments. Allen met Laura Diebel, a woman who entered his life at a time when fame was still far away. The early years of their relationship unfolded between performance trips, small comedy clubs, and television jobs that had not yet brought long-term stability. They married in 1984, when Allen was still constantly moving between comedy stages and had no way of knowing that only a few years later, his life would shift onto an entirely different trajectory. The early years of their marriage followed a relatively simple rhythm. Allen continued performing, traveling between cities, while Diebel largely maintained their family life away from the stage lights. In 1989, their daughter, Katherine Allen, was born. For Allen, this was an important moment in his personal life. But it was also during this period that his career began to change very rapidly. In the early 1990s, when Home Improvement became one of the most watched programs on American television, Tim Allen's life changed very quickly. Long working days on set, promotional tours, interviews, and a dense filming schedule gradually became his daily rhythm. The man who had once performed in small comedy clubs now stood at the center of American television. But that rhythm also created a growing distance between work and family. An evening spent away from home, extended trips, and the pressure of fame began to seep into his private life. During those years, Allen also had to face his own personal struggles, including a period in which he tried to control his use of alcohol. It was during this tense period that a personal incident brought Tim Allen's private life into legal headlines rather than onto the screen. In 1997, he was arrested in Michigan for driving under the influence, DUI. The incident occurred while Home Improvement was still one of the highest-rated television shows in the United States. Allen later pleaded guilty and was required to participate in a court-mandated rehabilitation program. For many viewers, it was just a brief news item in a stream of celebrity coverage. But for Allen, the incident clearly reflected the pressure of a period in which fame, work, and personal life were pulling him in different directions. By the end of the 1990s, the fractures in a marriage that had lasted more than a decade became increasingly difficult to conceal. At this point, Tim Allen's life was vastly different from the early years when they had met. Studio sets, promotional tours, a packed schedule, and the lights of American television had come to occupy nearly all of his time. That distance accumulated over many years, until the life they had once built together could no longer maintain its original balance. In 1999, Allen and Laura Diebel officially divorced, and the marriage that had begun when he was still performing on small comedy club stages ended at a time when he had become one of the most recognizable faces on American television. The separation not only closed a long-standing personal relationship, it also forced Allen to pause and reflect on the path he had traveled, from the struggling years before fame to the moment when success had reshaped nearly every aspect of his life. After many years of keeping his private life relatively low profile, Allen met Jane Hodgeduke in the early 2000s. Their relationship developed slowly, largely away from media attention. Unlike the early stage of his career when everything changed rapidly, Allen entered this relationship with a more stable pace of life. The two married in 2006 in a private ceremony in Colorado. 3 years later, in 2009, Tim Allen and Jane Hodgeduke welcomed their daughter, Elizabeth Allen Dick. Entering middle age, Allen became a father once again under very different circumstances from the first time. His schedule remained tied to film and television projects, but his family life this time was more private, largely separated from media attention. In the years that followed, much of Allen's life unfolded between two familiar spaces, the set and his home, where he spent time with his family after long working schedules. Over time, Tim Allen's image gradually became a familiar part of American entertainment culture. On screen, he often appeared in very ordinary settings: the living room of a television family, a garage where a father tinkers with tools, or a recording studio where a familiar voice is heard behind an animated character. The characters Allen portrayed were rarely constructed as grand cinematic heroes. They were usually ordinary men trying to understand their families, trying to adapt to the changes of life, and sometimes finding themselves in unexpected humorous situations. Across many decades, Allen moved through different spaces of the entertainment industry, from stand-up comedy stages to sitcom sets to family films to Pixar's animation studios. In all of these places, one image appeared repeatedly: Allen standing before a microphone, recording lines for Buzz Lightyear, the toy astronaut who had become an icon of the Toy Story series. Over the years, that voice gradually became part of the memory of many generations of audiences who grew up with Pixar's animated films. In recent years, Tim Allen's life has settled into a relatively steady rhythm. He lives primarily in California with his wife Jane Hodgeduke and their daughter Elizabeth Allen Dick. Much of his time is divided between work in the entertainment industry and a relatively private family life, largely removed from constant media attention. And in his career, Allen continues to maintain a steady presence in television and film. He remains involved in Disney projects, including the series The Santa Clauses, where he once again appears as Scott Calvin, the Santa Claus character associated with his name since the 1990s. At the same time, Allen occasionally returns to the stand-up comedy stage, performing live for audiences in special shows or smaller tours, as a way of returning to the space where his career first began. Outside of work, Allen's life largely unfolds in more ordinary settings: time at home with his family, personal activities, and creative projects that take place away from studio lights. Compared to the peak television years of the 1990s, his current pace of life is slower and more private, even though his name remains associated with multiple generations of audiences who have long been familiar with his image on screen. And perhaps that is also what keeps Tim Allen's story being told. Not only because of the television programs or films he once took part in, but because of the familiar image he embodied within them. A man standing in the middle of very ordinary situations of family and life, trying to keep everything working in his own way. After all the changes of the entertainment industry and of his personal life, that image still remains in the memory of many viewers. And perhaps the question remains open. When the stage lights gradually fade after each generation of audiences, what truly lasts the longest? The fame of a star, or the simple stories that audiences remember every time laughter echoes on the screen?